The United States has threatened to punish China if it gives military aid to Russia.
Japan says North Korea appears to have fired a ballistic missile.
Riyadh has reason to believe that the kingdom could be attacked.
Whenever we read or watch the news, what we get are a bunch of raw facts and descriptions of what's going on around the world. So the question is, how do you make sense of all that information, all of those facts? Some people will keep on gathering more and more facts about what's going on around the world and then develop their knowledge from that. However, even if you know a lot of facts and keep on gathering more and more, you're still likely to not understand what's going on. You can ask someone that reads the news every day about a particular issue, and that person is likely to give you a lot of facts about it. Nowadays, they're very easy to find, they're everywhere on the internet and anyone can access that information from their phones. However, there are some things that you cannot find very easily, which are the more profound underlying concepts of international relations that you can use to make sense of those facts and connect the dots between them. The problem is that those facts are very rarely mentioned on the news. Basically, here's a list of them, and each concept can explain some aspects of the behavior of a country. And you can pause the video now if you want to read them. A few days ago, I came across a game, and I noticed that some of the pieces can be used as an example to explain this perspective of international politics. The first part is also the hardest part, which is to get familiar with the main concepts of international relations, the concepts that I mentioned before. Each of them can be divided into different categories. For example, some are related to the international system, others are related to the internal compositions of a country, and others are related to the individual leaders themselves. We can also divide them into specific schools of thought. The main ones are realism, liberalism, and constructivism. The way I like to look at them is that each concept of international relations is like a drawing on a transparent layer. For example, let's say that this one is the security dilemma, this one is the balance of threat, and this one is international integration. If you put one, you can see a story develop, but if you combine some of these concepts, you can start to see an even bigger story. Let's start with the most basic layer of anarchy, which is that there is no world government above countries. Countries cannot trust the intentions of other countries, etc, etc. You can read the description, or you can also check out my other video on this topic. From here you can analyze, for example, the type of world polarity. Is the international system or a particular region unipolar, bipolar, or multipolar? For example, you can ask, how is the regional polarity in Europe? Well, it looks bipolar, with NATO on one side and Russia on the other. Then you can add the balance of power. How is the balance of power between both sides? You can also add the layer of the security dilemma. Can you see a security dilemma in the region? Well, if you go by the definition of a security dilemma, then clearly yes, there is a security dilemma in Europe. Then you can look at the type of strategies. For example, balancing. Well, yes, you can clearly see balancing behavior by European countries. You can also ask yourself, are there any smaller countries bandwagoning where they ally with a stronger power? Or are there any countries buck passing where they try to pass the responsibility of balancing to another country, either regionally or globally? You can also see examples of the balance of threat concept. Finland and Sweden see Russia as a threat, and they have applied to join NATO. This fits quite well with the balance of threat concept. This way, you can start to add different layers and see how they interact with each others. So the main question you have to ask yourself is, what is this behavior an example of? For example, you can also apply these concepts in other regions like Asia, where it looks like China's growth in power creates another example of a change in the balance of power. You can also see a security dilemma situation, and you can see countries in the region near China, like Japan and Australia, balancing against China. So you can use this to see how country behaviors fit the patterns behind these concepts, and you can also see how some of these concepts can collide with each other. For example, the concepts that I mentioned right now are realist concepts, which are related to power politics, which tends to be more pessimistic. But you can also add layers from liberalism, which is the competing school of thought, which tends to be more optimistic. For example, you can look at the democratic peace theory. Is this a conflict of political systems, of democracies versus non-democracies, or is it a realist balance of power issue? You can also look at international integration, and you can ask yourself, how would international integration affect the security dilemma in a bipolar region? For example, can that integration create a zone of peace, or will it instead favor one side over the other and break the balance of power and make the security dilemma even worse, making everyone less safe than before? You can also look at another school of thought, for example, social constructivism, and the concept of international norms and how countries follow them or break them or try to change them, and how that affects relations with other countries. These are all questions that you can create by looking at issues from this perspective. So what I'm trying to say is that you might not have one concept that will apply to every situation. You might have a higher percentage of concepts related to realism, like the balance of power, the security dilemma, when looking at conflicts, for example, Russia-NATO relations, or Japan-China relations, or Iran and Saudi Arabia. For example, you could have, let's say, an issue that is 60% realism, 20% liberalism, and 20% constructivism. But then, you might have another issue with a very different percentage. For example, Japan and Mexico relations, or Australia and New Zealand relations, where you might have, let's say for example, 50% liberalism, 45% constructivism, and 5% realism. I'm just throwing some random numbers here, but you get the point. Some concepts apply much more in some scenarios and not in others. And there are also other concepts that I didn't mention, so you can make it even more complex. You can add issues like geography, or economic reasons, or natural resources, or you can even look at the psychological factors of leaders themselves. So you can add them like layers on top of others and make a lot of different combinations. This way, you can get a lot of different perspectives and see how they match or don't match with each other. But the main thing is that you have to find which ones are more important than others, which ones are more relevant to the situation. This is the reason why everyone disagrees with each other when it comes to issues of international relations, because everyone is looking at the same issue from a different perspective, and they disagree over which factors are more important than others. Some will say that it's security and the balance of power. Others will say that it's the type of government, or the political system, or the ideology, or the economic factors. So my recommendation is to not just read the news and formulate your perspective based on facts and more facts, but instead to look at the underlying causes and ask yourself, what is this fact an example of? Is it an example of the security dilemma, or the balance of threats, the democratic peace theory, or economic integration, international norms, etc.? So that's my very unconventional view of international politics, and feel free to write your thoughts in the comment section and subscribe to this channel. I only have like 700 subscribers. This way I hope I can reach more people.